Why do avoidants fear the love of a super empath? At first glance, it might seem like an impossible question. After all, wouldn't everyone crave unconditional love, deep understanding, and emotional safety? But in the strange dance between attachment styles, what looks like a gift to one person can feel like a threat to another. And when you put the overwhelming love of a super empath in front of a dismissive avoidant, you're placing light in front of shadow, intimacy in front of fear, and truth in front of denial. That's why avoidants often pull away, retreat, or even sabotage relationships with empaths. They're not rejecting love itself, they're rejecting the vulnerability that love demands. Today, let's dive deep into why avoidants fear the love of a super empath, and why that very fear reveals so much about both their wounds and their hidden desires. To understand this fear, we first need to unpack who the super empath really is. A super empath is not just a kind or caring person. They are someone who feels emotions on an amplified scale. They see beneath the surface, they sense what others can't say, and they often extend love far beyond what most people can handle. For them, love is a calling. It's intuitive, nurturing, and powerful. When they connect with someone, especially an avoidant, they don't just meet them halfway. They pour in fully, offering safety, compassion, and acceptance. This level of love can be healing, but it can also be overwhelming, especially for someone who has spent their whole life protecting themselves from emotional closeness. Now let's look at the dismissive avoidant. Unlike the empath, they've built their identity on self-protection. From childhood or past trauma, they've learned that closeness is dangerous, that depending on others leads to disappointment, and that vulnerability equals weakness. To cope, they construct emotional walls. They present as independent, self-sufficient, even aloof. Deep down, they crave love like everyone else. But they've convinced themselves that needing someone is unsafe. So when a super empath comes along with unconditional love, it doesn't feel like a gift. It feels like exposure. It forces them to confront feelings they've buried for years. And for someone who's mastered the art of detachment, that kind of exposure feels terrifying. One of the main reasons avoidants fear the love of a super empath is because it disarms them. They're used to controlling intimacy by pulling back, creating distance, and keeping others at arm's length. Most people will retreat when faced with that kind of coldness. But the empath doesn't retreat. The empath sees through the act. They sense the hurt behind the avoidance, the loneliness behind the walls, and they keep offering warmth. This persistence breaks the avoidant's illusion of control. Suddenly, they can't dictate the pace of closeness anymore. They can't hide as easily. And when an empath shines light on the very places an avoidant is trying to keep dark, it feels like losing grip on the one thing they've always clung to: emotional safety through distance. Another reason avoidants fear this kind of love is because it awakens a longing they can't suppress. Imagine spending years telling yourself you don't need affection, you don't need closeness, you don't need anyone. Then one day someone comes along who loves you so fully that you can't help but feel it. The avoidant starts to crave the very thing they've denied. They feel the pull of intimacy, the desire for closeness, the comfort of being understood. But instead of leaning into it, they panic. Because if they allow themselves to need it, they also risk losing it. And to an avoidant, the thought of losing love is far scarier than never having it at all. Super empaths also bring out the emotional honesty. Avoidants try to escape. The empath doesn't just love on the surface, they mirror back the truth. They hold space for raw feelings. They invite openness. They encourage vulnerability. For the avoidant, who spent years avoiding their own pain, this feels unbearable. The love of a super empath can feel like standing naked in front of a mirror, forced to see all the parts of yourself you've tried to deny. It's not that the avoidant doesn't value the love, they're simply not prepared to face the emotional depth it demands. This fear also comes from the risk of dependency. Avoidants pride themselves on independence. They don't want to feel like they need anyone to survive. But a super empath's love is so nurturing, so healing, that the avoidant begins to rely on it in ways that scare them. They start to feel softer, more open, more connected, and with that comes dependency. And dependency to an avoidant feels like weakness. So they push back, they pull away, They sabotage, all to preserve their fragile sense of independence, even though deep down they don't want to lose the empath. But here's the paradox. The more the avoidant fears the empath's love, the more they're drawn to it. They may leave, but they'll think about it. They may distance themselves, but they'll feel the absence. They may reject it in the moment, but later, in the quiet of their own loneliness, they'll long for it. This push and pull creates the painful cycle empaths often find themselves in. Giving love, watching the avoidant retreat, only to have them circle back when the silence becomes too heavy. The avoidant fears the love, but they can't stay away from it either. And that's why so many empath-avoidant relationships feel like an emotional battlefield. For the super empath, understanding this fear is crucial. It's easy to take the avoidant's coldness as rejection, to believe that their walls mean you're unworthy, but in truth, their fear has little to do with you and everything to do with them. Your love touches wounds they've spent a lifetime avoiding. Your closeness challenges their defenses. Your presence calls out the very vulnerability they're running from. And while they may not be ready to embrace it, that doesn't make your love any less powerful or valuable. In fact, the very reason avoidants fear a super empath's love is the same reason they never forget it. Long after the relationship ends, they remember the way they were seen without mask, the way they were accepted without conditions, the way they were loved without having to earn it. That kind of love leaves an imprint. And though the avoidant may not say it, they'll carry it with them, sometimes for years, sometimes for life. The fear may push them away, but the memory of being loved so deeply will always pull at them in quiet moments. For super empaths, the lesson isn't to stop loving, but to start setting boundaries. Your love is powerful, but it's not your job to heal someone who fears it. Your empathy is a gift, but it should never be wasted on someone who treats it like a threat. The avoidant may fear your love, but you don't need to shrink it to make them comfortable. You don't need to dim your light to keep their shadows hidden. The healthiest path forward is to honor your love, but also honor yourself. Sometimes the most compassionate thing you can do is to stop pouring into someone who can't receive it, and instead pour that love back into your own soul. So why do avoidants fear the love of a super empath? Because it strips away their defenses, because it awakens a longing they can't control, because it makes them dependent in ways they swore they'd never be, and because it exposes the truth they've tried to hide, that deep down they crave love as much as anyone else. The difference is that the empath embraces that craving, while the avoidant runs from it. But no matter how far they run, the love of a super empath is something they'll never truly escape. It's too real, too raw, too unforgettable. In the end, the love of a super empath is both the avoidant's greatest fear and their greatest loss. It shows them what's possible, even if they're too afraid to claim it. And for the empath, the power lies not in changing the avoidant, but in recognizing that their love is sacred, and that anyone who fears it is simply not ready for the gift. That realization transforms the pain of rejection into the strength of self-worth. And that, my friends, is why avoidants fear the love of a super empath.